we have no real media in this state. Well, you have us.
It's really time for a parent revolution.
Never let a good crisis go to waste. That's what the left did with COVID in so many different ways.
Wind energy, especially offshore wind, is a big loser and just another government boondoggle.
Like, what's going on?
People are fed up. They lied to us then. They're lying to us now. They're assaulting our families.
What we do is we look at the lies of the left that they keep pushing out, that America doesn't work for black people. That is not true.
They want to now monopolize truth and say, truth is only what we say truth is. Damn the data, damn the science.
The key with science is it always needs to serve objective thinking. They just call anyone who challenges them a science deniers.
They're evil.
Shut up or we'll cancel you.
What we're going through is a cultural revolution.
This is big, and this is how change begins.
Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, welcome to the Ocean State Current Command Bunker. Now playing from in the dugout, number 37, Mike Stenhouse.
Very important federal action last week shut down one of Rhode Island's offshore wind farm projects. Does this mean Rhode Island needs a new energy strategy to be able to meet future demands of the populace? Hey, welcome to In the Dugout, folks. Your host, Mike Stenhouse here. I got two really well-informed guests on this topic of energy. We're going to meet in just a second. Yesterday, there was a press conference in Rhode Island by all the political supremacists who are bought into the religion of climate change. And whenever you see such high-powered people unified in anything, you know there's some scam behind it. They're trying to convince you of something that's not true. And here to give you the truth today, I want to introduce you to our guests. First of all, we welcome back Alan Brooks. Alan, welcome back to In the Dugout.
Thank you, Mike. Glad to be here.
You write a Substack column called Energy Musings. You're a senior fellow at the National Center for Energy Analytics, but most importantly, you're an adjunct scholar to our Rhode Island Center for Freedom and Prosperity on the issue of energy. So that's great. And we welcome a rookie to In the Dugout who's wearing a cap. We'll get into that in a second. Meghan Lapp. Meghan, welcome to the Dugout.
Thanks for having me.
You are an attorney. You are a liaison to the energy industry, or if you would, or government for Seafreeze, which is a great employer in Rhode Island, working with fishermen. You've worked with the Fishermen's Advisory Board and on all kinds of projects. We welcome you. Tell us about your cap you're wearing today.
So this cap, you can see it says Relentless there. That's one of our vessels that operates out of Davisville. And last year we went to the Supreme Court of the United States and we overturned the Chevron deference, which is a big win for the little guy in America.
Did not know you were involved in that case. That's a huge case, of course. It's the federal case centered around actions by former Governor Gina Raimondo and under Commerce Secretary. So a lot of Rhode Island connections here. All right, the headline reads from last Friday: Trump administration kills massive offshore wind project. And this is Revolution Wind off Rhode Island. First of all, what is Revolution Wind?
Well, it's a offshore wind project being built by a Danish developer, Ørsted. It's 704 megawatts of ultimate capacity that's being shared between Connecticut and Rhode Island for the power. And the project started a number of years ago. It was a lease that was acquired when Ørsted bought Deepwater Wind, which many people don't remember, but Deepwater was the wind was the one who developed the Block Island wind farm. And they had some other leases, and this is one of them that Ørsted has developed. And I think they got initial approval in 2018. So it's been a long project. And, the question is, did they do it properly? And
that's what we're going to get into here in just a second. Yep. And so here is the article we posted on our website, the Ocean State Current, which is basically just a rewrite of your Substack article. So Meghan, Lapp, what was the reason that the Trump administration shut down Revolution Wind construction, which is by all accounts about 70–80% complete?
Well, I think that there are a number of factors. So obviously on day one, President Trump issued an executive order for a review of all current leases and permitted projects and the investigation was going to entail various aspects of the impacts of offshore wind, whether environmental, whether radar interference, national defense, etc. On July 29th, the Secretary of the Interior issued a secretarial order pursuant to Trump's executive order and said, we're going to look at all of these things, and we're particularly going to look at projects that have open lawsuits. Revolution Wind is one of them. A project off of Maryland, which just got remanded with the intent to vacate the COP approval. That is another one. There are multiple other projects with open lawsuits. And so those were various projects, I think, that were first on the review list. And so I think that's probably one of the reasons why we saw this, as one of the first headlines to hit. I would be willing to bet that there are more. And we have petitions in. My company sued on Vineyard Wind, and we have petitions in on Sunrise and various other projects. And so we will see.
All right, I want to get to all that later. I want to get to, because I want to know what, is this just the first in a domino effect? But let's just focus on Revolution Wind. All right, so that was the process, the administrative process, the executive order, the Department of Interior memo. But what did they cite as the reason to shut it down? Was it lack of due process? Was it manipulated data? Was it overrun costs? What was the reason? Either one of you, Megan, Alan, jump in.
They talked about interference with reasonable uses of the ocean. That would be fishing. We fought that for a decade. The Outer Continental Shelf Lands Act says when the secretary issues offshore wind leases, he has to do so in a way that prevents interference with reasonable uses of the ocean. So federally permitted fishing, reasonable use of the ocean, right? They didn't do that. They didn't deconflict.
Yeah, I mean, the ocean, we hear the ocean is for everybody, right? It's not just for big windmill companies. Alan, there was also a national security concern, right?
Correct. That was what I was going to mention, is national security was cited in the specific letter directed to Ørsted. That was not defined as to what the issue is. But certainly there are a lot of potential issues, radar being one of them. Radar it's not just, interfering with airplanes or search and rescue, but it's also for our national security, because we can block the radar that's located onshore and create a blind spot for anybody coming from the ocean to come in, for adversarial reasons into the U.S.
So in short, it could interfere. I assume it could interfere with sonar as well. But these above ground and below ground structures of these windmills could interfere with our Defense Department's radar and sonar systems to try to detect enemy, if you would want to take it to that, enemy ships or planes. Megan? Absolutely.
And this is something that, I and others have hammered on for years now. And I think it's really important for the public to know, in December, this past December of 2024, the Swedish government terminated 13 offshore wind projects in the Baltic because of a threat from Russia. And they said our defense of our nation is more important than some quote unquote renewable energy project. And they said you won't be able to see planes. It would reduce their detection time for incoming missiles by half. They would not have submarine detection. And they also can't detect drones. That's a problem. And so why would we plaster our entire eastern seaboard with something that prevents us from also detecting those things? And so those are very significant, national security issues that the previous administration didn't address. They just pretended like they didn't exist.
Yeah. Now here's an AI generated image, but Alan, approximately how far below the sea and how far above the water line do these monstrosities go?
Well, they are basically anchored to the ocean floor. So whatever the water depth is, But then, and I'm not sure, these are probably 700-800 feet tall above the water line. So, I mean, we're talking
700-800
about a
feet.
7-8 story, building. You start talking about buildings, comparisons.
Now, I was just at Fenway Park, and the Green Monster is pretty tall. I was just there, sat right by it. So this would be 25 to 30 times taller than the Green Monster, which is 30 feet tall.
Yes, definitely.
And Megan, if I remember, which was it Revolution Wind where the blade recently fell off?
Sure.
And that blade, they said, was as big as a football field?
Yeah, that was actually Vineyard Wind, which is not too far from Revolution.
Okay.
Off the coast of Nantucket. But yeah, it's over 350 feet long, each blade. And when it shattered, boy, it shattered into a lot of pieces that ended up closing Nantucket's beaches in the middle of July last year. So that was a problem. It was a hazard to navigation. And you know what I think is really interesting, Mike, is that the wind industry knows that like blades getting, shattered and broken is like a common occurrence. So they have insurance for this. And when I had done a calculated, they want to put 2,000-3,000 turbines on the East Coast, and you calculate out how many blade breaks that is a year statistically, it was something crazy like 40. And I'm like, can you imagine for the whole East Coast of the United States, which has beautiful
40
beaches?
times?
Yeah. So could you imagine we'd be shut down all the time? That's not okay. And most people
It's not
don't
just the shutdown. I mean, it's these toxic fiberglass shards
Right.
and the fish coming ashore. I mean, I couldn't find it in
pollution.
my office, but somewhere I have a bag full of some of that debris that was washed up.
Yeah.
And they're saying it's estimated, even projected to happen 40 times a year with these projects.
Yeah. Could you imagine even the navigational hazards? Giant chunks of fiberglass all over the place. You don't even know where they are. Boom. Whoops. A total disaster. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I want to go back just to national security for a second and wrap that up, because I read somewhere, and again, this could just be, look, the theme here is the climate alarmists, the green energy supporters, the government who's bought and sold into all this agenda are issuing us false narratives and lies. We're going to get into more of that in a second. And it appears, so that's all corruption. When a government looks the other way to obvious facts and says, oh, don't worry about it, it's in your own best interest. But apparently the Department of Defense, the U.S. bought off from a national security, I assume under the Biden administration. But does the corruption run so deep that even the Department of Defense put its own best interests at risk?
I think that there's a lot of the right hand doesn't know what the left hand is doing in the Department of Defense because it's very siloed, as well as, many other aspects of our government. But I do know that in 2017, 2018, the DoD and the Department of the Navy did a wind compatibility assessment with the East Coast of the U.S. and offshore wind. Okay. The majority of the East Coast was ruled a wind exclusion zone. You can't put windmills here. This is not okay because it interferes with our defense capabilities. And shortly thereafter, after, people in Washington started to see this document, they put up a disclaimer. The Navy put up a disclaimer and they said, oh, well, just because it says you can't put windmills here doesn't mean that you can't put windmills here. And it was that makes no sense. And I think, to your point, there are people within agencies who, politically want to climb ladders. My experience, for example, with the Coast Guard has been that the people on the ground are wow, this is a major, major problem. But the people at the top who sit in the desks,
right? And the former chairman of Joint Chiefs of Staff, Alan, I know you've got a broad view of energy as an expert. But I remember some years ago, a chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff saying that climate change was the greatest threat the United States military faced. I mean, this is what fuels all this corruption.
Well, that's a popular theme, and has been propagated by the last administration to a large degree, and before that, the Obama administration, was a champion also. But I'm going to go back to one thing. The radar issue and radar interference in the national security issues surfaced initially when Cape Wind was trying to be developed in the early 2000s. And the military was actually the ones who fought the issue the most because they saw their radar being interfered for the Air Force and Navy bases, etc. And that's what they were objecting to.
And that was before the military was woke.
Yes, definitely. But it's an issue that the military has been addressing for years. And Megan can tell you, because she's been intimately involved in it, there's no solution to this radar interference issue. And we've got a study commission, a multi-agency commission that's working on trying to find a solution. And they were supposed to have one by, I think, this year or next year. And they've got it extended now to like 2032. Because nobody has an idea as to what's going to work to solve this problem. So you put Megan's mariners at risk when they're out there on a wind farm, because if somebody falls overboard, there's, virtually no way to do rescue. Search and rescue is, inhibited because of the radar issue.
So the use of the ocean equitably, if you would, was one of the platforms of this decision, as was the national security. Were those the primary two, Megan? And was it the Department of Interior that did this under Burgum?
Yep. Those are the two things that they cited. Yep.
All right. Now, as you alluded to earlier, the Revolution Wind project, it may just be the first of a number of such projects to go down. Here, let me see, where is it here? Here it is. Where is it? Here is a letter that you co-signed, calling to look at the Sunrise wind construction.
Yep.
All right, to the same Doug Burgum. And Alan, here is a letter you and I co-signed, calling for similar consideration, albeit for maybe different reasons, for Vineyard Wind to do that. And the potential problems go beyond just the two cited in the Revolution Wind decision. There's legal problems. They didn't follow proper process problems set forth by many national oceanographic agencies. Megan, do you want to get into some of that?
Sure. As part of the offshore wind, process, which really can't even be called a process because BOEM just totally made it up on the fly, like as they went. BOEM is the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management. They lease and manage offshore outer continental shelf lands under the ocean for energy development. So they do this for oil and gas. They also do it for wind. Now, oil and gas has like an actual procedure with rules. The offshore wind was kind of like a free-for-all Wild West type of thing, and they made it up as they went along. They did not deconflict with fisheries or any other uses of the ocean, shipping, tugboats, anything, at the beginning. And so they created all these problems. They didn't consult with anybody at the beginning. They just threw the leases out there and said, oh, well, we'll figure it out as we go. So then they had interagency consultation with NOAA Fisheries, National Marine Fisheries Service, Coast Guard, etc. These other agencies were like, hey, some of these places have real problems, right? Some of this is really a problem. And at that point, BOEM was like, oh, well, so for Revolution Wind in particular, National Marine Fisheries Service said it would cause population level impacts to some species. They said you will destroy the essential fish habitat in this area. It is a habitat area of particular concern. And so anyway, there were all these interagency communications that said, you really shouldn't do this, right? You really shouldn't do this here. And BOEM was like, we don't care. Then if you go even further south, to the Sunrise Wind, which abuts Revolution Wind, it's a larger project. That one, They want to put an open water cooling system that sucks in 8 to 10 million gallons of seawater a day, cooks it up to 90 degrees, injects it with essentially Clorox, with chlorinated substance, and then dumps it back into the ocean. So hot, chlorinated water back into the ocean on areas where fish spawn, fish breed, etc.
Every single day, 8 to 10 million gallons.
The whole time. And so these are the people, to your point of, well, are we going to save the planet? No, you're warming the ocean with Clorox and hot water. No, that's not good for the environment. That's bad. And it would never be allowed on land.
So beyond the legal, the process, the environmental concerns that Megan just talked about, you and I have talked before, but I asked you to summarize. There's also capacity concerns. There's reliability concerns. There's performance concerns. They're not living up to what was billed. Talk about all those aspects of why these offshore wind projects are just don't seem to be worth anywhere near the money we're dumping into it.
Yeah, that's right, Mike. The issue boils down to offshore wind and wind and renewables in general are pitched on the basis that it's cheap power. It's cheap because the fuel is free. The wind blows, the sun shines, and that's cheap. The problem is that's only one aspect of what your electricity will wind up costing, because you've got to build a whole new infrastructure to bring that power from remote areas to consumers. So you've got more transmission costs. You then have the issue of the fact that the sun goes down every day. The wind doesn't always blow. So if people are relying on that power, they need a backup source for when there's a lack of wind or sun. That's a whole secondary infrastructure that has to be built and maintained and financed, every day to back up when wind and solar don't show up. So that's a huge problem for consumers, and the consumers don't know this, and this is one of the problems. Most people have no concept of where electricity comes from other than out of the wall. They don't know how it's generated. They don't know what it costs to make.
Yeah, for instance, they don't realize that electric vehicle charging stations or chargers from the wall are often powered by coal. So
right.
That's why I call them coal-powered cars. That's what I call them.
There's a whole system of misinterpretations and misrepresentations.
Yep.
And the public hasn't enough knowledge to understand what it is.
So we're talking here, again, our largest theme here today for this discussion, and so many discussions we've had on this show, is honesty in government. Or dishonesty in government, I should say, the lack of honesty. So Megan, when you think of everything we've been told about offshore wind saving the planet, to put a little cynical summary on it, that the government's been telling us, we're going to talk about the press conference that was held in Rhode Island in just a few minutes. When you think of all that, but then you look at the legal, the environmental, the capacity, the reliability, the procedural, the corruption, the manipulated data. We just mentioned that Revolution Wind might just be the first in a domino effect. Do you fully expect, as an attorney, as someone who's looked at the law and understands all the letters that have been written by DOI and elsewhere, do you expect other Rhode Island or Eastern Seaboard wind projects to be similarly halted?
I do. And I will say I'm not an attorney. I have a law degree. But
okay.
I do, because a lot of them, these issues are just a part of the entire story. They exist for multiple projects. Radar interference is up and down the coast. The environmental impacts up and down the coast. Ignorance of, the Coast Guard requirements. I think that every project has a lot of the same impacts, some more than others, and depending on where they're cited in particular things. But these issues are applicable across the board. And I do think that we will see multiple projects fall. And I think, they've already pulled all the call areas off the board, all the new lease areas that they had wanted to cite. And I'm hoping that they go back to the Obama administration. They take all the Obama leases and wipe them off the map.
All right, so that's a great point. There's two things here. You can lease the land or the ocean, provide a lease, or in this case, you can actually, so you can stop or not the leases, but you can also stop or not the construction. They're separate things, right?
They're different things. So there were giant areas of the Central Atlantic that they had looked at, and they sent out a call just basically saying, hey, all these millions of acres, let's put windmills in them. Let's put leases in them before the leases were defined. Those are off the table. Now we have about 27 leases or so. Actually, no, now it's more because they did the Gulf of Maine, but whatever, on the East Coast. Okay. So Gulf of Maine down to like South Carolina.
Potential project.
Lot of potential projects. Some of them, 11 of them have been approved for construction, and some of those are undergoing construction. Some haven't started. And then you have the remainder of the leases. So there's a lot of different stages here, and I'm sure that they'll probably have to go through various mechanisms to address each one of those stages. But let's hope that they all fall.
Alan, let's bring this up again to a higher level. These offshore wind farms, one of them is down, stopped. There's appeals, of course, going on. I cannot imagine, at least for the next 3.5 years under the Trump administration, that construction will be allowed to happen again. As Meghan indicated, some of the other offshore wind projects, and I'm just thinking in terms of Rhode Island right now, that would impact Rhode Island, could also be halted. Our Act on Climate laws, which sets a lot of mandates and milestones to try to achieve a net zero carbon emissions output by 2050, is largely based on the offshore wind and other wind and solar. So let me ask you this: is there any way that Rhode Island's Act on Climate and net zero strategy can be realized without these offshore wind farms coming online?
The politicians will tell you that that can't happen without offshore wind. That's because nobody wants to build onshore wind farms in New England, okay, or in Rhode Island in particular. But in terms of meeting the state goals, which are actually the most aggressive, I think, in the nation for the electric utility industry, the utility can actually meet that mandate by buying certificates that are representative of clean power generated anywhere else in New England or anywhere else in the country. So they can just ante up the money and meet that objective. Now, there are a lot of other things that get wrapped up.
I need to understand this.
Okay.
I don't. And
if you have a renewable.
What do you mean you can buy a certificate? Does that actually give you energy?
No, it gives you.
Well, that's what I'm saying. How do we meet energy demands without energy producing plants?
Mike, we don't have enough time to deal with that question. This gets to why people don't understand how the electric industry works. But we have a system that says if you have a renewable energy project, every megawatt hour of power that you generate, you also get a certificate for clean energy, which you can then sell, i.e. monetize, make money. And that's what a lot of people are doing to meet their mandates.
Well, it's smoke and mirrors then, what you're saying. We're pretending we're meeting mandates because we can't produce enough energy affordably, so we're just going to buy these certificates. It's like the friggin' Wizard of Oz giving a guy a certificate for a heart. There's no heart in that damn thing, right, Meghan?
Exactly. It is a shell game, and it's a money game. That's one of the things they call them ORECs, offshore renewable energy credits, for these companies. So they get a bunch of ORECs and then they sell them around. And, but that happens, as Alan said, with various quote unquote green energy projects. And it is a scam. And I think that most people just don't understand this whole concept, as Alan said, of you still have to have the gas plant running 100% of the time. you're paying 2 electric bills. Like, you have to have it running all the time, because when the wind cuts out, you've got to jack up the gas plant so that you can turn the lights on, and that your businesses don't shut down, and that, you know, all of these other things. So it's like, there's really no point. There's 0 point to this, because you still have to have the backup power that is capable of, you know, of supporting the entire grid all the time. And it's got to be running 100% of the time. So you don't get away from conventional sources of energy when you have wind. It doesn't work. All it is a joke.
All right. So I want to raise it up, Alan. Okay, yeah, you're way more studied to me, but I want to keep it simple for stupid people like me. And I use that word stupid for a reason. I'll come back to that in a second. But let me rephrase the question. Should Rhode Island, in order to meet the energy demands, AI-driven, whatever else of Rhode Island, in order to provide affordable, abundant, and reliable energy as well, real energy, not certificates for energy, does Rhode Island need a new energy strategy for this state?
I would say definitely yes. You know, they need to understand the realities of the electric utility industry, how we generate power, what it costs, what people want. They want affordable. They want reliable. And in many cases, reliable is superior to affordable, because we have a system, a society that lives on power. And if you turn that power off, find out how quickly your life changes. And that's
exactly. Well, as you know, we have, let me see if I can bring it up real quick. We have we came up with a friend of mine, we've been stealing it from, came up with a little, what do they call it? A meme, I guess, called freezing in the dark. Which, if you don't have enough electricity to turn on the lights and to heat your electric powered heat in the coldest of winter nights, you very well could freeze in the dark. And I'm trying to find my graphic on that. There it is right here. Hold on. So let me share this out. But this, I mean, this is not a joke.
No,
people could die. More people die from cold than they do from heat. And if we can't generate enough electricity on the coldest, if we have a long winter snap, literally people could freeze in the dark. This is not an absurd concept, is it, Alan?
No, it's not. And I can tell you, I've lived through it. We had a problem in Texas. With an ice storm that took out the power, or took out a lot of the power of the state. You know, my own situation, you know, we would have been without power, except for the fact that we had a backup generator. But we would have been without power for 3 or 4 days.
Yeah,
we have been without power due to hurricanes in the Gulf Coast.
Yeah. I don't even know about that. Are these windmills hurricane proof?
No, they're not.
We don't
raise
know.
That a lot.
We don't really know.
They're not rated for 3 or above.
They're designed for hurricane category 3, up to category 3, but we don't know whether that's accurate or not.
Yeah, they've lied to us about everything else.
Yeah.
Yep.
That's the basic intro.
All right. So Megan, you're not an attorney, but you got a law degree. And our Attorney General, Peter Nerona, said in reacting to the Trump administration's shutdown of Revolution Wind last week, that since half of our state's clean energy portfolio for our Act on Climate net zero strategy is supposed to come from Revolution Wind and other offshore wind projects, that our state's Act on Climate would be dead in the water, quote, dead in the water, pun intended, I think, without Revolution Wind. Does that seem to make sense to you?
Well, I remember when that whole act was like being discussed and stuff at the State House, And people in the State House came out and said at that time, yeah, there's no way we can ever do this. We know that we can't do it, but we're going to vote for it anyway as like an aspirational thing. So they already know that they can't do it, number one. And number two, you know, something that I think is really interesting that nobody really has discussed, because it happened a long time ago, about Revolution Wind itself, is that Revolution Wind was a guaranteed contract between the developer and the state going all the way back to Deepwater Wind. So when Deepwater Wind, and that was a whole debacle with the state, the Public Utilities Commission said it's going to be too expensive and it's not going to create any jobs. We shouldn't do this. The governor forced the legislature to pass legislation that basically said, well, we have to build Deepwater Wind and buy the Block Island Wind Farm. Okay. That was for the Block Island project. But as part of that contract in 2009, it said whatever developer owns the Block Island Wind project will be guaranteed the rights to provide the state of Rhode Island with its first, I think it was 350 megawatts of offshore wind power. Yeah. So Ørsted bought the Block Island Wind Farm so that then they would have a guaranteed power contract with the state of Rhode Island. That was guaranteed for them, really regardless of price, regardless of situation, regardless of if this is good for the consumer or not. And it happened way before like the Act on Climate. That was why Ørsted bought Deepwater Wind, because it knew it was guaranteed a contract with the state of Rhode Island, which was unbelievable that we signed
politics
this.
And money, not just political agendas, but money.
It's only politics. It's only money. It'd be very interesting to see who's making all that money individually. But to the Act on Climate thing, they were saying when they passed it, well, this is more aspirational. We know that we can't fill it, so oh well. So now if they're going to pretend that like, oh my goodness, this is such a big deal, like, come on.
Yeah, well, our center issued a report that documented how there was no proper due diligence done, or at least taken into consideration when they passed the Act on Climate mandates and all that many years ago. Megan, I want to stick with you for a second and then go to Alan for comment on it as well. But you were on Newsmax recently, and here was a post they put up there from Trump on two shows. And this is why I used the word stupid a little while ago. He called it any state that is relying on windmills and solar for their future power generation is just flat out stupid. The high costs and everything else. What was your comment on that on Newsmax last week?
I can't remember completely, but I remember talking about the costs because we were talking in this particular segment on the Empire Wind project and off of New York, and the Sunrise project south of Revolution Wind that's supposed to bring power into New York. The cost of that, okay, just so people can understand, translate this in your brain into your electric bill, okay?
All right, while they look at this graphic of people looking at their electric bill.
Exactly. The cost of natural gas electric that day in New York was around $23 per megawatt hour for natural gas electric, which is primarily what they have and primarily what we have. The cost of Sunrise Wind's project was going to be over $150 per megawatt hour, $23 to $150. Think about that happening in your electric bill. Like, could you afford to live? The answer is no. And you know what? To your point earlier, Mike, about like, you know, freezing in the dark and stuff, I think one thing, so I used to live on the Mississippi Gulf Coast, lived through Hurricane Katrina, multiple other hurricanes. And the thing that I think about the most, and I don't think people really think about this, is if you have a serious electrical failure, like we were without electric after Hurricane Katrina for like weeks and weeks, you have no water. Your water pumps run on electric. And could you imagine a situation where your whole electrical grid goes down and you don't have any water? You can't get water because your pump doesn't work. What are you going to do? Like, what are you going to do for 3 weeks on end? Are you going to, like, what are you going to do? It's a problem. And so, like, to Alan's point, yeah, you better make sure that you have an electrical grid that's like really stable and not something that's junk.
Alan, yesterday, I like to take you both through this. We'll start with you, Alan. Yesterday, all the political supremacists who are bought into the religion of climate change held a press conference, state officials, union officials, advocacy groups, Congress people, the 4 congressmen from Rhode Island, the governor. They were losing their minds yesterday because they could see that their green energy strategy, their act on climate goals, perhaps the whole national green energy myth was in the process of getting blown up. And the panic in their voices yesterday was palpable. One of their big claims, Alan, is that, oh, these wind farms provide such low cost energy. You say?
No, I can't say that on public. The reality is not. That's
Right.
the answer. It's not cheap. And that's what I was mentioning earlier. When you talk about the fuel being free, which makes it quote unquote cheap, but it's the fact that you've got to have a secondary utility system to provide power when the fuel doesn't show up to generate. So, I
Well,
mean,
but isn't it more than that? The cost of building these things, the cost of the transmission lines, the cost of all the repairs. Megan talked about how it's expected that these blades are going to break and fall in. I mean, all these other costs. Yes, okay, if you get everything up and running smoothly for maybe the few months it might run smoothly. Okay, maybe at that point in time, that production of energy might be low cost. But when you consider the cost of erecting and maintaining all this, in addition to what you just said, it becomes an enormous cost to the consumer, does it not?
sure. And I would point you to the fact that what was it 2023 was when Revolution Wind 2 was bid. And Rhode Island Energy was going to buy the power. They did an analysis. The state of Rhode Island's, energy department, the staff of the Public Utilities Commission all analyzed the contract proposal, and they all agreed and presented in front of the Public Utilities Commission this was too expensive. The problem was there was supposed to be a hearing, but the day before the hearing date, the contract terminated. The proposed contract terminated. So there was, quote unquote, no need for the PUC to hold the hearing. Everything of interest, all the numbers were blacked out in the documents that are available publicly. So
What do you mean the numbers were blacked out? What does that mean?
They're redacted, which means it's
like costs and prices and all that?
Quote unquote, confidential company information. Therefore, it's protected from being, made public.
No, they were hiding how much this thing was going to cost. They were hiding it.
That's what I'm saying. We, Megan, myself, and some others I know were anxiously awaiting to see what the PUC hearing was going to expose in terms of the numbers. But we didn't have the hearing, and the public documents don't disclose anything. So we have no idea what Ørsted was proposing in terms of a cost, other than Rhode Island Energy saying this was going to be $6 billion of additional cost to the ratepayers. But, we don't know the full scope of all of this, but
Right. So
they rejected it, and the state rejected it too.
So this is my point. If you don't know, who are an expert in this, and you don't know, and Megan doesn't know what those numbers and true costs are going to be, how could lawmakers 4 or 5 years ago have known anything enough to provide a valid cost benefit analysis to say, here's what the costs are going to be, here's what the benefits are going to be environmentally, here's what the prices are going to be to consumers? None of that was known. You said we're going to make it up as we go along or something like that, Megan. I mean, these lawmakers and policymakers, not just elected officials, but DEM and whatever else, they were negligent. They did not ask the right questions. They did not have the right information at their fingertips to make proper discussions. And now we've got to undo it all. Megan, tell me if I'm right or wrong on that.
Mike, I don't think that they cared what the information was, because my question is, where are the kickbacks going? Where's the money going? If you go to like the University of Rhode Island, they get a lot of money from windmill stuff. They get a lot of money from, the federal government, or used to, for that. There's a lot of NGO money that's filtered through many, many avenues, and the question, Mike, is always, where's the money? Where is it going? And who is it going to, right? Like, facts don't matter when there's money floating around. And unfortunately, that has been the case with offshore wind until now. So hopefully now we get some facts out there. Hopefully, hopefully the broader public starts to wake up and understand what this really means.
Right, so I guess so. Go ahead, Al. Go ahead, Alan.
Let me add something. You mentioned a word or a phrase, cost benefit analysis. Go back to Deepwater Wind.
Yep.
They presented a price which I think was based a historic price of 24.4 cents a kilowatt hour that was going to escalate at 3.5% or whatever,
Yep.
For the life of the contract. That was presented to the PUC. The PUC did a cost benefit analysis, and that's why they rejected it as too expensive.
Right.
That's where, as Megan cited, the governor put pressure on the legislators, and the legislatures
Change the rule, get the outcome.
rewrote the approach that the PUC can use for offshore.
Yeah, I remember that.
And that is no cost benefit analysis. So the second time it was presented to them, they approved it and said as much as, we have no choice but to approve this.
And Megan, this goes to the corruption of the process, right?
Right. Well, and you know what, Alan, I'm glad that you brought that up, because their actual analysis said you'll get a small handful of temporary jobs out of this. Just thinking back to the picture that you showed with our elected officials and the labor people behind them, supposedly, right? You'll get a small number of temporary jobs out of this, but in the end, you will have a net job loss in the state, because businesses will not be able to afford the electric rates, and then they will leave and go to other places. And we've seen that happen. Like, how many people have relocated to Texas and Florida and things like that because of low energy, right?
Yeah, and people leaving because of high energy costs. And we know Rhode Island should have already lost one of our 2 congressional seats if Raimondo didn't cheat at the Commerce Department and rig the census to overcount 55,000 people in our state. But I want to go to jobs. That was my next point I was going to anyway. So first of all, they said, well, the Trump administration just took away from Rhode Islanders a low-cost, reliable source of future energy. We've just dispelled both of those. It's high cost and it's not reliable at all. Then they said, and there's going to be a loss of hundreds of union jobs. They stressed the union, bought and sold by the union. Megan, there's only a few jobs, not even considering the loss of jobs from businesses leaving the state. But a lot of those jobs are with foreign companies, right? Only probably a very small percent would be Rhode Islanders. And B, what about the loss of fishermen's jobs? Don't they count?
I would hope that they count. The fishing industry in the state of Rhode Island supports thousands of jobs. And, like I said today down at that press conference in Point Judith, on our boats and the boats we service, we have first, second, third, and fourth generation U.S. commercial fishermen. And those jobs can continue indefinitely for more generations if we are allowed to continue fishing. But we can't continue fishing if all of our fishing grounds are taken up by offshore windmills. And, our jobs should matter. They should. And they're not temporary jobs. They're permanent jobs. They're year-round, generational, hundreds and hundreds of years, and, can be hundreds of years more. And so
it's part of our culture in this state, right? Too. It's our history.
Well, you know what? We're the ocean state, not the windmill state. But our elected politicians would, try to have you think otherwise.
Alan, I know you've already described the reasons for it, but just give me a reaction. Senator Whitehouse, I don't know. He set the record. He's gone on the Senate floor, 86 times, and had some kind of long soliloquy on climate change and all that. But he said yesterday at the press conference of these climate supremacists, wind power is one of the fastest, cheapest ways to meet rising electricity demand. Where do these guys? I mean, are they? Do you think they're ignorant or just flat out bought and sold liars?
Well,
You probably won't use either term, but that's what I'll say.
They are embedded into a culture that says this is, the way we have to change our lives and our society. We've got to go green. We've got to basically tell everybody how you're going to live, what vehicles you're going to drive, how you're going to build your houses, how you're going to heat them, etc. Because this is, a religious, a conviction that they have, and it's driving people crazy because their utility bills are going up and they don't understand why. And
they don't seem to understand anything. I mean, then you have Congressman Magazine who said one of the stupidest things in the press conference I could imagine. He said the biggest winner from this move is going to be Saudi Arabia because we're going to have to buy more oil from them. Megan, we've got almost unlimited fossil fuels between natural gas and oil in our own country. We don't have to buy a goddamn gallon from Saudi Arabia. That's why the Trump administration is doing this. We need abundant, reliable, affordable energy for the people of this country. We have it right here within our own borders. Let's use it. We don't need to go to Saudi Arabia, do we?
No, and I think really the counterpoint to that is, hey, guess what? The only winner from Revolution Wind is the Danish government.
Right.
The developer of that project is majority owned by the government of Denmark. So what they are proposing is that the government of Denmark put Rhode Island commercial fishermen out of business because they want to build windmills on our fishing grounds. Oh, and by the way, get our tax subsidies to do it. And the government of Denmark is the one who's upset, as well as the government of Norway, who is the second largest shareholder of that company. The first largest shareholder, majority shareholder, government of Denmark. Second largest shareholder, government of Norway. That's a problem. And I think, from a fishing perspective, back in like the 70s, we created the exclusive economic zone. That was created specifically to keep foreign fishing vessels off of our fishing grounds and to domesticate the fishing industry for Americans and keep the foreigners out, right? Now we're letting the foreigners back in. We're letting them back in to take our fishing grounds. These are foreign governments that are taking our fishing grounds and are going to put Americans out of business. And that really is the story, I think, that is not being told here. And that's unfortunate.
In my view, the Trump administration's energy strategy, America First energy strategy, will create, I don't know how many tens of thousands of jobs in this country compared to the few hundred that might be lost on, or a few thousand that might be lost on some of these wind projects. And again, most of those out of the country, foreigner jobs, and not to mention the loss of fishing jobs. Everything. Look, just you guys can comment if you want. If not, I want to move on to sort of some related areas. But everything we heard in that press conference yesterday, the exact opposite is true. I mean, everything was flat out 180 degrees long. And I think Patrick Crowley, president of Rhode Island AFL-CIO, summed it up best in showing how everything he said is backwards. Stopping Revolution Wind doesn't just kill jobs. It undermines our energy security. No. It raises costs for families. No. And abandons the very people who are building our state's future. No, we're building a better energy future for our citizens and residents in this state by returning to a sane and affordable energy strategy. Alan Brooks, agree?
Yep. I think that a lot of what they said, clearly was just designed to prop up the argument that they need to have offshore wind. But it's not for the benefit of the customer, for the ratepayers or the citizens of Rhode Island.
I want to segue into another area, and then give you guys both a chance to wrap up. But thank you for spending all this time with us. There was a headline in Just the News, and this is something we have been following for years. But energy advocates are asking the U.S. Attorney General Pam Bondi to look into this practice, and this kind of goes to some of these lawsuits and corrupt judges, if you would. Basically, there's a group out there that has been inviting federal judges from across the country to go to webinars and seminars, very all expenses paid, beautiful places, basically to indoctrinate them into the climate change religion so that when cases come before their court, they would be pre-biased against energy producers and in favor of the green energy advocates. Megan, do you know anything about all this?
I haven't seen that in particular. I have seen similar types of things where industries can buy Reuters events and bring all the journalists together and, basically pay them off for good press. But what I have seen actually in reading decisions as well as experiencing decisions in the courts in our region is that there definitely is a bias. And I remember not that long ago, there was a wind turbine manufacturer who was suing another wind turbine manufacturer. Siemens Gamesa, I believe, was suing General Electric, and then General Electric countersued, or it was vice versa with those plaintiffs, right? And it was basically that the other company had stolen proprietary data, and it was like copyright stuff, right? Trademark stuff, copyright stuff, and that they were selling turbines using the other company's proprietary information. The judge in Boston found that that was in fact true, that, developer A had stolen proprietary data from developer B. It was a copyright and patent fraud case. He said, yes, that has happened. But instead of saying, hey, company that stole the proprietary data, you cannot use it, which is normal, he said, because of climate change, I'm only just going to make you pay a fine. That was like not that bad a fine. So you look at that and you go, your job as a judge is to say, did they steal proprietary data? Yes. But now you're just going to base your decision based on climate change. The law doesn't say you base your decision on climate change. The law says, if they stole company data, you can't let them use it. But that's a reality in our judicial system, unfortunately.
Yeah. Well, Alan, I think you follow some of the lawsuits that are out there, don't you? Now, you might remember we wrote about this and had a lot of interviews at the time a few years ago. There is, Rhode Island was the first state to sue energy producers for, quote, unspecified climate change damages in our state. That all the buildings that have been wiped out because of the floods, with the oceans rising 75 feet and all of the people who have been incinerated because of climate change, they're suing energy producers. And the judge in that case, before he even heard evidence, put out a statement so biased against the energy producers that I wonder if he was one of these judges that might have gone to one of these indoctrination camps by this. I can't think of the name of the group that's been doing this. I'll get it for you. But anyway, Alan, what have you seen about fairness and justice in our judicial system when it comes to climate change lawsuits?
Well, obviously, this has been an ongoing issue for quite a while. And of course, if you look at the European situation, you see even more stress, of going to the courts for relief and to punish the fossil fuel industry over emissions, which is a global issue. And this is one of the issues that the nature of local malicious activities, which is really how the states and cities and all that are trying to propagate up their cases against the fossil fuel industry, because the emissions are basically a global issue. And
right.
We don't have any control over what.
Yeah, little with 1 million people, and is going to impact global temperatures in a world of 7 billion people.
Right. But if you look at U.S. emissions since the early 90s, our emissions has been in a downward trend for one reason.
Right.
And that has been the substitution of natural gas for coal in burning to generate.
And other technological advancements, right?
Yes. But the real one has been gas, which is lower carbon emissions, than coal. That substitution has us on a downward trend. We've been leading the world in that downward trend. But that doesn't
Without being
mean
part of the
anything.
Paris Climate Accord or anything like that.
No, but understand, to a large degree, it goes to Megan's, where follow the money. The oil and gas industry in particular is noted for being, very wealthy, very, large, having lots of money, and municipalities and states who are struggling to finance their budgets and the social costs, et cetera, are looking for new sources of money. And to hire, or basically get their attorney general and his, people who are on his staff that the government's already paying for, to push cases where they have a chance of getting, billions of dollars of income.
Really, somebody's spending money on this group called the Climate Judiciary Project. I'm going to read this paragraph to you, Megan, then take you to a higher level. The CJP, the Climate Judiciary Project, claims to provide judges at these all-expense-paid seminars with authoritative, objective, and trusted education on climate science, the impacts of climate change, and the ways climate science is arising in the law. However, it's critical to say they're only providing narrative supporting climate, pro-climate agenda. So here's the final question for you, Megan. What is stunning about all of this to me is that based on completely false narratives, based on religious beliefs versus documented, and by religious, I mean just blind trust in something, based on manipulated data, based on corrupted processes, based on any lack of due diligence, cost-benefit analysis, that our entire state's future, because you can't have a prosperous society without enough energy, or certainly without affordable energy. I mean, it's the basis of everything, especially in a New England state, that our entire state's future was put at risk based on myths and unsupported false narratives. It astounds me that lawmakers could be so evil. Megan, final word to you.
Well, unfortunately, it doesn't astound me because I have to deal with the government, federal and, state and agency in many, many aspects of my job. And, you can follow the money and you can see how policy gets made. And unfortunately, that is the majority of the time. Now, not everyone is bought. There are good men and women in, state, federal, and agency governments. But unfortunately, you see money play a very big factor. And I would be very, very interested to see how all of the federal monies have filtered into this state, into various aspects of this state, and see a chart of that, because I think that will tell you everything you need to know.
Alan, you and I have talked about this on and off air, but there is a special Senate commission that was just initially convened. They'll have more substantive meetings coming up, we think, starting in September, whose official charter is to evaluate, kind of a cheerleading thing, evaluate where we are in our path to comply with all the Act on Climate mandates and milestones. I think this action by the federal government to shut down a Revolution Wind has to completely change the focus of that commission, and they now have to say, what do we need to do to have a realistic energy strategy that will provide for the future security and prosperity of Rhode Islanders? What is your message to those committee members, Alan Brooks?
Well, Mike,
commission members, I should say.
I would hope that your conclusion is accurate, that they will be motivated to take a broader look at the whole policy issue and understand how it actually has to come together. It's easy to be aspirational and we all want to be aspirational in all sorts of things having to do with our lives and our futures and our children's futures and our grandchildren's futures. But the reality is you've got to look at what physics teaches you about energy, what economics teaches you about the cost of doing these projects, what the social cost is, obviously. I mean, we have to consider that. But these all have to be weighed, and they need to be weighed on a scale that nobody has their thumb on one side. And that's going to be the biggest challenge for the Rhode Island legislature.
And Megan, I think you pretty much alluded to it when you said, yeah, but when money's involved, that appropriate due diligence just doesn't seem to matter.
Well, it depends who the individuals are. I will say that. But, you know, if you look at the amount of windmill money that is poured into the state of Rhode Island, both from developers as well as various NGOs, various governmental agencies, I'd be very curious to see how much federal money under previous administrations and initiatives have flown into this state through various avenues. And I did see something that I thought very interesting on social media this morning. The John DePietro show said that the biggest scandal in Rhode Island history is lying with the windmills and the unions and the politicians. So I'm curious to see if he investigates that and where it would go, because to the point of following the money, there's a lot of money to be followed.
Well, you look at our Washington Bridge debacle here in Rhode Island, you look at the false narratives with COVID, and all the money that was made by the pharmaceutical companies there, and we begin to see a pattern, and I think probably John DePietro is right about that. Meghan Lapp, Alan Brooks, this is a discussion I hope every Rhode Island, at least every Rhode Island politician watches, and many in the public. We're being lied to. The government is being dishonest with you. They're basing public policy that affects your life in so many ways on blatantly false, if not purposely falsely woven narratives. And somebody's got to be held accountable. But Megan and Alan, thank you for helping us to expose the false myths today.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
And we'll have you, I'm sure, both on again soon. And for you, our viewers, I hope you stayed with us for this hour plus. Look, we need this kind of in-depth analysis because all you're getting is sound bites from all the other news networks. Nobody's really digging to the heart of the matter like we did today. So thank you for tuning in. And until next game, Mike Stanos out. See ya.